The approach to a video game remake is one of those special things about this medium. In movies or TV, a remake is more often a reboot, with new actors and a different take on the material. Video games aren't bound to such restrictions. Now at their worst, a game remake can come across as a cheap cash grab, and a shoddy remaster might ruin what made a game so beloved in the first place. More often though, remakes take a middling approach. They might bring a console exclusive to handhelds, or, especially lately, adapt a relatively recent game to current consoles and improve the graphics and frame rate while maintaining the same core gameplay. These are common. They may not be cash grabs, but they are still cash ins. It's a lot easier to improve on an existing game than to make a whole new one. But that doesn't at all invalidate them. A better frame rate and modernized controls can effectively make a remake like this the definitive version of a game. But the most interesting remakes are also the rarest. When a developer remakes a game that's a few generations old and takes the opportunity to rebuild it from the ground up. These blend the best elements of film with the flexibility this industry provides. They're not merely the same game you've played before. No, it's a game rebooted to raise it to modern standards. The graphics, the design, often even the engine and physics. Everything is scrutinized. Everything old is new again. Now there's a big risk to that. Modernizing a game without a careful hand could effectively remove the heart of the experience, resulting in a product that's in some ways more insulting than those cheap cash grabs. But when such a complete remake goes well, when a developer understands what made the original work and keeps that heart intact, a remake could effectively replace its clunky, outdated predecessor. And few games are as clunky and outdated as the original Metroid. Oh, it was groundbreaking in its own time, but we've seen before, such ambition tends to make a game that ages terribly. The NES just wasn't quite capable of what the devs were trying to do. By the time technology caught up with them, Metroid looked like some kind of glorified proof of concept for what the series would become. But there are still little flashes of brilliance within it. It's the origin point for a franchise that's defined by its world building and consistency. The fact that it was so aged 20 years later meant that it was prime, I gotta stop doing that. Prime for a remake. Actually, maybe that pun is appropriate. The fact that it actually got remade speaks to the heights Metroid soared to in the mid-2000s. Built off the massive success of Retro Studios' Metroid Prime, the series entered a renaissance. From 2002 to 2007, the number of games starring Samus Aran more than doubled. Metroid was more popular and more important than it had ever been, so it made sense to bring the original game up to modern standards. The story is the same. The Galactic Federation brings an age of peace, space pirates steal Metroids, Samus is hired to take them down. It makes no effort whatsoever to hide Samus's gender this time, but that was no secret by 2004. But the intro does throw in the fact that Samus was raised on Zebes, which hints that this will turn out to be a far more personal tale than we knew. I'm back where the season began, and everything old is new again. Well, okay, the pea shooter is still old, but don't think Samus is anywhere near as weak as she was back in '86. She can fire from a crouch, aim in 8 directions, and even her wall jump is back to its former glory. And I'm really glad they didn't restrict any of this. But I know how this goes. Go left, get the morph ball. And now whenever you get an upgrade, you're taken to the equipment menu to learn all about it. It's super quick, and it's made even more snappy since you can mash A to skip the item fanfare now. I don't mind this at all, and in fact it only makes me appreciate more how this series avoided turning into a mind-numbing tutorial slog, as too many other Nintendo franchises have. It feels great to be back in more familiar, Metroid-esque territory after the previous game was such a departure. I loved the X-Parasites and the fusion suit and all, but from the enemies to the pickups to the map design to Samus herself, this is so much more iconic. And maybe that's why it's only now hitting me just how different Samus controls compared to Super Metroid. Most of her floatiness is gone, and that impacts movement, yes, but it also affects combat. Samus is sharper and faster, and holding R to ult fire instead of cycling through a menu is still so much more natural. Much as I liked the moon jump, I might prefer this leaner or crunchier Samus. But Zero Mission isn't just modernizing the core. Samus has learned a lot of new tricks since 1986, and almost all of her most famous abilities have been implemented, and only those famous abilities. See, Metroid Fusion was distinct, for better and worse. It boldly took the franchise where it had never gone before, but Zero Mission hasn't really done anything new with Samus's power set. These are the same abilities I've seen before. Well, okay, I guess the power grip is new as an upgrade, and it's cool that they made it into an upgrade. It prevents a sort of sticky timeline wicket, considering the only reason Samus could climb in the last game was because the fusion suit was so much lighter. But all the old upgrades are put to use in new ways. The speed booster in particular is greatly expanded here. It's a piece of cake to aim the shine spark where you want it to be, and even the morph ball can be sparked. Honestly, these might be the most fun secrets in the whole series. Seriously, I am loving the puzzles in this game, and the degree of outside-the-box thinking it takes to crack them. Often I know something is hidden, and I have an idea of how to get to it, but it's still a matter of skill to actually get there. That speaks to the balance that Zero Mission strikes between Super Metroid's open world and Fusion's linear, skill-focused design. The story strikes the same balance, and it's a return to form for the series. The intro is the shortest we've seen, and there are no more lengthy text box conversations constantly getting in the way of the fun. Instead, there are brief but very effective cutscenes that speak through subtext. Speaking of subtext, Chozo statues aren't just for power-ups anymore. I ran into this standing statue, and when I hopped in, the game wordlessly indicated where I needed to go. Even just having a map here is a massive change from the NES version, and I don't mind at all that it points you in the right direction. Plus, same as Fusion, it's a portable game, and wandering around aimlessly wouldn't be appropriate. Unlike Fusion, though, you're not so directly directed from place to place. There's no Adam here on Zebes, and no direct instruction on what exactly you're supposed to be doing. I was often being shown only a general area I needed to be in, and the deeper I got, the further off the obvious route I needed to go to reach those points. But conveyance is still achieved through a sometimes radical redesign of individual rooms, and the frequent addition of completely new locations. No longer did I spend the first half hour zigzagging through the same hallways over and over. Now I needed the long beam to move to the second half of the map, and before I could do that, I was shown the roadblock tutorial, which is finally not a suicide pit. As for new areas, I was pleasantly surprised when I popped up into Criteria, which was shown to exist up here back in Super Metroid. The fact that Zero Mission adds it here is indicative of how seriously it takes maintaining consistency with what had come before. Or, I guess, what will come after. Super Metroid Zebes will be a desolate planet out of time, but Zero Mission has to characterize the world at an earlier point, when it was far more alive. To that end, the graphics are made colorful and vibrant to a greater degree than ever before. That impacts the tone of the game, and it fits this design perfectly. It reminds me more than a little of Metroid 2's swashbuckling adventure. This is not about isolation or loneliness. This is about fun. But it's also about presenting a vast, interconnected, and believable world, and once again Zero Mission styles itself after the best of its predecessors. Flora and fauna teem through every corner of Zebes, and I really got the impression that this ecosystem was alive to a degree that not even Super Metroid could match. The graphical style is my favorite in the whole series, but the music, I've never been a fan of the Game Boy Advance's sound hardware, or its relative lack of sound hardware to be more exact. See, sound mixing had to be done using CPU cycles, meaning that higher quality music would come at the direct cost of the GBA's power. Fusion wasn't too badly affected by this, thanks to its lower-key, ambient soundtrack, but Zero Mission has to remix some of the more upbeat melodies of the NES game. Brinstar is particularly grating, and it sucks because the composition itself is fantastic. It just comes out sounding so tinny and distorted. This isn't a deal breaker, of course. I kinda got used to it after a while, and most of the new music doesn't really suffer too bad, being more clearly composed with the GBA in mind. The game design really started diverging from the original once I got to Kraid, where once the Brinstar depths were a massive labyrinth of repeated rooms and wasted time, Zero Mission adds so much that the structure is unrecognizable. New puzzles and features and gimmicks make finding Kraid an absolute blast. Where the original was designed to seem like it had more depth than it really did, Zero Mission is just designed. But with that more modern design may come a little less player agency. A lot of those little tricks I found back on the NES don't seem to apply here. Near the start, I decided to ignore the map and go up through these tunnels, same as I had in Metroid. But this time I was dunked in acid for trying. Later, after I got the ice beam, I came through here again, but I was actually blocked by the Chozo statue. So I headed to the opposite side of the chasm, skillfully climbed the Ripper ladder, and still I couldn't break this sequence. In fact, by the time I did get up there, it was in the middle of quite the backtracking slog. This was one of the only times I felt Zero Mission was held back by its adherence to the original map. I had to go from Kraid to Norfair for the high jump, then all the way back to Brinstar for the Varia suit, and then all the way back down to Norfair to use it. And it's just because the top of Brinstar is where the Varia suit was in the original game. Even so, there has got to be a faster way to do this. I keep noticing speed blocks in suspicious places. Remember, speedrunning culture was alive and well by 2004, and Super Metroid was one of the biggest reasons it got there. So Zero Mission is clearly built with speedrunning in mind, way more than any of its predecessors. The Shine Spark is put to better use than it ever has been, not just for item upgrades, but to bolt through rooms you've been through before. It can turn a meandering backtrack into more of a skill spectacle if you know where to use it. But I don't. A game built on Metroid structure just might not be able to achieve player conveyance with as much finesse as Super Metroid. But it did at least railroad me less and less as I got further, and near the end, Chozo indicators stopped showing up at all. And I do love the way it eases off on the handholding as you get deeper. For one, most of the Chozo indicators are entirely optional if you want to hop into them. but I was actually allowed to fall completely off the quote-unquote correct route, and I didn't even know it at the time. See, I think I was supposed to beat this boss, head down to Lower Norfair, and get stuck in this little series of hallways since I didn't have super missiles. So I should have gone back up, and discovered that something had cleared the way into this tunnel. Then I'd have fought this boss named Imago, who hilariously crashes through the scenery and clears the way to the super missiles when you beat him. Down in Lower Norfair, you can even see this thing wriggling around. But I have a problem. I'm really, really bad at adventure games, and I guess I lacked the spatial awareness to notice that this wriggling bug was right below the tunnel. So instead, I just shot out a ceiling tile and ended up circumnavigating Lower Norfair in a completely different path. I diverged from the main route, but I never knew I'd even done it until I played the game again. And oh yeah, I'm playing the game again. More on that later. The fact that I was allowed to do this, but that I didn't even notice anything wrong about it, speaks to just how evolved the team's approach to map design had become. There wasn't much at all to Kraid or Ridley in the original game. They're a lot more impressive here, but they honestly just feel like easier retreads of Super Metroid's renditions, which I guess makes sense from a story perspective, but it was still disappointing to see the exact same strategies working. Don't get me wrong, Kraid and Ridley are still great. They just come across as one of the few things that's a little too remakey about this remake. Fortunately, there are also a slew of new bosses, and they more than make up for it. Like Fusion, some of these guys are built up and escalated long before you ever fight them, and there's always more strategy to them than just tanking hits and spamming missiles. They use the layout of their rooms and the gimmicks of their layers to great effect. But there's still nothing here that got my heart racing the way Ridley did in Super Metroid, and nothing even came close to the insane difficulty of most of the bosses in Fusion. Instead of building a bridge, Kraid and Ridley's enormous visages open to reveal the path to Mother Brain. The Metroids down here are amazingly an actual threat. They've broken out and killed the space pirates who had captured them. They swarm from the background, they're larger than before, and most importantly, they don't stay frozen for nearly as long. The Mother Brain fight itself is still frustrating, but the faster, twitchier controls at least make it a fun sort of frustrating. And hey, look, she actually kind of fights back now. That's cute. Whoops. This is the first time Zero Mission has managed to kill me, which speaks again to how much easier it is than Fusion. By the end of Fusion, I had died more than 20 times. Zero Mission got me once, but I was a little more careful on the second attempt and managed to take her down. Mother Brain just can't die without triggering an explosive countdown. One more trip up and out of that familiar chasm, but the game doesn't just end on an elevator this time. Samus emerges onto the Criterion surface to make her escape. It could have been a little more challenging, and it could have done more new, but taken on its own merits. Zero Mission is a fantastic game, and, wait. Oh, Zero Mission ain't done! The space pirates shoot Samus down while she's just trying to do the usual Metroid ending reveal. She crash lands back on Zebes with nothing on hand aside from her rather useless emergency pistol. And it's all she'll be able to rely on as she attempts to infiltrate the space pirate mothership. Commandeering one of their ships seems to be her only option for escape. Samus still has her acrobatic abilities. She can climb and wall jump, but she really is almost defenseless. With virtually no protection, Samus takes even more damage than she did in Fusion, and she can't fight back at all. The best that pistol can do is paralyze a pirate for a few seconds. This means that Zero Mission suddenly shifts hard into a genre change. The adventure till now has been a triumphant, action-packed romp. Now, out of nowhere, it's all about stealth. When the space pirates catch me, the music changes, an alarm blares, and they just swarm me. The only option is to run and hide, and this, alongside a steep difficulty spike, really sets this apart from what's come before. I died plenty of times through here. It's a more developed take on those heart-rending moments in Fusion, where Samus would cower from the SAX. But where those were largely interactive cutscenes as long as you did what you were supposed to, Zero Mission's stealth is an actual game, with multiple options to get through. The pirates eventually backed me up into the Chozo ruins, and here it got even tougher, as I had to avoid searchlights and crumbling terrain that would often put me directly into their line of sight. It's so exhilarating to just barely scrape through like this. Actually, it's reminiscent of that feeling I got at the start of the original game, where Samus was alone, outnumbered, and underpowered. Deep in the ruins, I found a mural that depicted a familiar suit of armor. This triggers a flashback. Samus has been here before. And so the series has finally confirmed that Samus really was raised here, raised by the Chozo, and it looks like they've got one more test for her. This is the only boss that you ever have to fight from such a weak position, and it reflects Samus' self back at her when she passes that test. When you pass that test. Well, through the whole game, I had been finding these unknown items that were incompatible with the power suit, Passing this test does more than restore what Samus had before. It also decodes those latent abilities, ascending her to the height of her potential. To put it less dramatically, I gained the gravity suit, the space jump, and the freaking plasma beam, all at the same time. An even more triumphant rendition of the Brinstar theme kicked in, and the space pirates had absolutely no chance. Rooms that moments before I had to carefully and quietly sneak through were now just torn apart. In fact, the space pirates are hiding from Samus now. I think the space pirates became the arbiters of their own undoing. They should have just let Samus go, because by bringing her back, they have unwittingly created their most powerful enemy. This juxtaposition is powerful and exciting, and most importantly, earned. But even now, the game's not backing off the difficulty. Space pirates still hit hard and never drop restorative pickups. And back toward the mothership, a single elite can rip you apart if you're not careful. There's no more guidance from here on. It's up to you to climb to the bridge of the mothership and retrieve the power bombs. I actually spent a lot of time just wandering around here, but this close to the end, a little esoteric design is more than justified. It feels now like with all this power, I'm pushing against the game design, and it is fantastic. One more of those wonderful skill-based puzzles netted me an extra tank, and I knew I'd need it. Because surely, this entire tough-as-nails sequence was building to an incredible final boss. I made my way to the top of the ship, where Ridley built a robot of himself! Oh, he looks so cool! Oh man, he's gonna whittle away with me, I'm gonna die so many times, and it'll feel so good when I finally beat him. That's it. The final boss is one of the easiest bosses in Zero Mission, and it's not like it has the poignant story to fall back on like Super Metroid. It's just a Ridley robot, and it comes almost entirely out of left field. I have read that it's a lot more of a challenge if you've gotten all the items. I'm sure that would have been awesome, but I'm no completionist, and I wish they had maybe scaled it with how many energy tanks you have or something. I guess they didn't want people getting stuck so close to the end, but compared to what I've already overcome, this was a bit of an anticlimax. Either that, or the Ridley robot is just a massive coward, and decides to just self-destruct instead of fighting me. Regardless, Samus has mere minutes to get out of here. This is the final escape sequence in 2D Metroid, and just with the sheer number of options you've got here, it is definitely one of the best. Heck, Metroid fans have argued for years whether Zero Mission is the best in the series, that it may be better than Super Metroid, and in a lot of ways I see where they're coming from. The hunt for upgrades is the most well-developed in this franchise, finally nailing that balance between using your head and using your skill. It also doesn't arbitrarily lock you into the endgame. A power bomb can shatter this tunnel and get you back to the main map. And since I thought it could have been more challenging, there's a hard mode that unlocks once you beat the game. I died in the first minute! Oh, I am gonna be playing this again. Screen transitions are a snap, upgrade completion is shown on a second playthrough, and the tone has so much more levity, without sacrificing anything in the way of mythos or lore. It reveals more about Samus Aran than anything has to this point, and by confirming her origins, finally provides the reason for these statues to help her and guide her throughout the galaxy. One of the final shots returns to the mural, where it's revealed that a very young Samus added a personal touch. Ah, the feels! If you were curious about how far we'd come, beating the game even unlocks the original Metroid. And before I started Zero Mission, I did beat that game one more time, no mods, just to compare. It was still interesting as a time capsule of gaming in 1986, but man, it was a chore to get through. This is not even a remotely fair comparison. Zero Mission doesn't just superannuate Metroid, it replaces it. That historical curiosity is the only reason left to play the NES version. Zero Mission is the definitive way to experience the series' origins. And it might just be the definitive Metroid experience, period. Super Metroid is an epic and a masterpiece. It sticks with you, but a lot of the reason it sticks with you has to do with its scope and pacing. It has incredible highs, but spends just as much time being more introspective and low-key. And I loved Fusion when I could actually play it, but all that story focus was only really gonna be engaging once. It'd be hard to slog through all that again. But Zero Mission is not Super Metroid, and it's definitely not Fusion. It's less sprawling than the former, more playable than the latter, and more replayable than both of them. I've actually beaten it again just since I started writing this script, and on what is now my third playthrough, I'm finding so many ways to blaze through it faster and faster. Zero Mission is all Rise. It's the sort of evergreen game I can see myself playing regularly, because Zero Mission is 2D Metroid at its most evolved. It combines and refines the very best aspects of the series, and then surprises you with something brand new. I don't think it's as great an experience as Super Metroid, but I do think it's every bit its equal as a video game. It's the gold standard of what a remake in this medium can be, and it is the perfect capstone to the series. And now that I have completed all of the side-scrolling games, I don't think I was being fair to the Metroid series. Metroid and I might have gotten off on the wrong foot. The first game I really played is often considered a masterpiece in its own right, but, well, you know how Fusion played well to my tastes? I think the direction this first game I played played against my tastes, and when I was 14, I wasn't mature enough to see past that. I let that first impression color my judgment of this franchise. Even as much as I loved Super Metroid, because of its reputation, I assumed that it was an outlier, and I didn't really give the other 2D games a chance. But now that I have, what's the verdict? Am I, in fact, a geek about Metroid? Abso-freaking-lutely. At the very least, I am for the 2D games. Contrary to what I expected going in, there's so much more to them than just wandering around and finding upgrades. So much more skill to be earned beyond just increasing your avatar's strength. Metroid has surprised me, it has impressed me, and on a few occasions, it has humbled me. Rather than the adventure interfering with the gameplay, this series uses its gameplay to create and inform a cohesive world, and the way every single adventure builds directly off the last makes Metroid worth geeking over. But that's not the only reason I've been able to stick with them. Creating these episodes and having you guys to hold me to a high standard has forced me to engage with Metroid on a level I never had before, and I want to thank each and every one of you for this opportunity. I found so much more to love about these games than I even expected to, and it is a damn shame that the 2D series ended in 2004. At least that's where it officially ended. If my Patreon has hit a milestone for a bonus episode, then next time on TGC, I'll be covering the game that indirectly started this entire project, another Metroid 2 remake. And if it hasn't, then I'll see you guys next season. Until then, you keep geeking, I'll keep critiquing. Thank you so much for watching.